Cop tries to frame black woman in court, shocked when she proves she's the state's chief prosecutor. In a bustling courthouse in downtown Atlanta, a place that had seen its fair share of triumphs and tragedies, a storm of whispers circled the halls. Reports circulated of a heated face-off between a veteran police officer and a black woman he claimed to have caught in an illegal scheme. Onlookers expected a routine hearing, but no one was prepared for the seismic revelation that would rip the courtroom apart. Tension crackled in the air. Eyes darted toward the woman who seemed far too composed for someone facing serious charges. Soon, a single declaration would explode every assumption and set a shocking chain of events in motion. The wide corridors of the Fulton County Courthouse echoed with the commotion of people hustling in and out of courtrooms, anxious lawyers juggling case files, and watchful clerks checking their lists. It was a bright morning. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the polished marble floors. Court officials insisted on order and decorum, but tension hummed beneath the surface whenever a sensational case was on the docket. That particular day, a hearing was scheduled that seemed at first glance mundane. A middle-aged police officer, known around the city as Bradley Peterson, had sworn out a complaint against a woman he accused of assaulting him during a traffic stop. Seldom did assault on an officer charges draw a large crowd, but rumor traveled quickly that something was off about the narrative. Observers noted that the accused woman had arrived without a lawyer at her side, but carried herself with a poised dignity that unsettled even the most stoic bailiffs. Courtroom 7B was an unassuming chamber. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and each seat in the gallery squeaked with signs of age. A hush fell over the onlookers as the bailiff called, "All rise. The Superior Court of Fulton County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Lynn presiding." Judge Lynn, a measured man in his late 50s with a reputation for fairness, strode in wearing his black robe. His penetrating gaze scanned the room, aware that today's hearing was more than it seemed. Seated at the prosecution's table, dressed in a crisp uniform, was Officer Bradley Peterson. Despite a pressed uniform and polished badge, he looked tense, jaw clenched and shoulders rigid. He eyed the defendant's table, anticipating a wave of attorneys to champion the woman's cause. Instead, there was only one figure seated there, a tall, graceful black woman with a quiet confidence. She wore a charcoal gray suit and a single gold bracelet on her wrist, the only flash of color in her understated attire. A few folks in the audience recognized her, Serena Monroe. She was known in certain circles, but her quiet demeanor had prevented many from piecing together exactly who she was. The uninitiated saw only a poised figure with a calm expression. As for the ones who suspected her true identity, they watched with bated breath, aware that once her credentials were revealed, no corner of that courtroom would be left unshaken. When the bailiff finished calling the case number, Officer Peterson shot to his feet. He began his statement describing in painstaking detail how he had pulled Miss Monroe over for a broken taillight. According to his testimony, she became hostile and assaulted him with an open hand to his chest when he requested her license and registration. His words were direct, measured, and sprinkled with coded language meant to portray Serena as an aggressive suspect. It was the same pattern many had observed too often in courts across the country. But not everyone accepted that pattern at face value. Judge Lynn turned to the woman at the defense table. "Ma'am, do you have representation today?" Serena rose, her posture flawless. "I do not, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself for the moment." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Officer Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line. This was his turf, an environment in which he felt he held the upper hand. A defendant without an attorney was usually an easy target. "Very well," Judge Lynn said carefully. "We'll proceed with a preliminary hearing." It seemed straightforward. The prosecution would outline the charges, present the evidence, and the judge would determine if probable cause existed. However, few in that audience realized that the typical roles in this courtroom were about to twist in a spectacular display, and the seeds of a storm were already planted. Officer Peterson's eyes flicked to the front row. Seated behind the prosecution's table was an assistant district attorney. Oddly, the ADA seemed disturbed, not triumphant as one might expect in a routine assault on an officer case. As the hearing began, the ADA shot an anxious glance at Serena Monroe, as though recognizing her and simultaneously scrambling to recall from where. Serena, however, offered a genial nod in the ADA's direction and returned her attention to the judge. Peterson described the day in question. The traffic stop had taken place on a quiet stretch of road near Centennial Olympic Park, not far from the CNN Center, a well-known landmark in Atlanta. He recounted how Miss Monroe had refused to show her license, how she acted belligerently, shouting that she knew her rights. He insisted that she struck him when he tried to open her car door. At first, the officer's story sounded consistent, at least on the surface. He even had photographs of his uniform with a slight tear on the sleeve and some scuff marks on his shoes. But he presented no body cam footage. He claimed the battery had died earlier that day. The lack of direct evidence unsettled Judge Lynn, who made a pointed note of it. "We have a sworn statement from you, Officer Peterson," the judge said, "but no visual or audio evidence from your department's equipment." "That's correct, Your Honor," Peterson replied, clearing his throat. "It was an unfortunate coincidence." "A coincidence indeed," the judge said skeptically. "Miss Monroe, do you have any statement regarding the charges?" Serena stood, offering a small, polite smile to the judge. "Yes, Your Honor. First, I want to note the alleged time of this traffic stop. I wasn't anywhere near Centennial Olympic Park at that hour. In fact, I was in court for another matter, a hearing I was overseeing in my capacity as—" She paused, studying the officer's face. "Someone who works within the Fulton County justice system. I have multiple witnesses who can verify this." Her tone was steady, free of haughtiness, but the words landed with surprising weight. A faint sense of foreboding stirred among the spectators, many of whom were attorneys or law students seeking to glean knowledge from real-life courtroom drama. As she continued, she provided detailed timestamps, down to the minute, of her movements that day. She also promised to produce official logs. Officer Peterson's face paled for a moment. The ADA's brow knitted in confusion, and Judge Lynn studied his notes, arching an eyebrow. "Given these details, Miss Monroe, do you intend to provide documentary evidence for your whereabouts?" Judge Lynn asked. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, "but that's not all. I also have reason to believe the officer's claims are not merely a matter of mistaken identity. They are intentionally false." The audience rustled. The opening lines of the confrontation were set. In the next moments, what began as a routine hearing about an alleged assault would morph into a thunderous display of secrets, vendettas, and the shocking knowledge that Miss Monroe was no ordinary defendant. During a brief recess, rumors flew around the courthouse corridors. Several junior attorneys recognized Miss Monroe from high-profile events where she'd delivered powerful speeches about criminal justice reform. Whispers circulated that she might hold a significant role in the Georgia legal system. Some believed she was a newly appointed special counsel, while others thought she might be affiliated with the Attorney General's office. The more attuned realized she was none other than the newly sworn-in chief prosecutor for the state of Georgia, a position that outranked everyone else in the local district attorney's office. Officer Peterson, for all his bravado, had never seen Miss Monroe in official attire. He claimed not to recognize her at the traffic stop. If the allegations against him were fabricated, the consequences of targeting a high-ranking official would be dire. Still, the rumor mill was just that. Rumors. Nothing was confirmed. Only a handful of staffers were certain of Serena's identity, and they were not the types to gossip openly in the hallway. They were, however, quietly outraged. "Did you see her?" whispered one clerk to another. "That's her, I'm sure of it. She spoke at the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal building last month on prosecutorial misconduct and law enforcement accountability." "If Officer Peterson lied, oh my God, that's career suicide," the other clerk replied. Word spread like a wildfire. By the time the hearing resumed, the gallery was packed to standing room capacity. Even those with unrelated cases found excuses to linger. Judge Lin returned to the bench, noting the increased crowd. He took a moment to reassert order before focusing on the tall woman standing at the defense table. "Miss Monroe," he said carefully, "you claimed you were nowhere near the scene of the alleged incident. Can you provide your evidence now?" "Yes, Your Honor." She walked to the defense podium with an air of certainty that caught everyone's attention. She handed a stack of documents to the court clerk, who passed them up to the judge. "These are official records, including court dockets and security logs from my office. As you can see, I was in a meeting with multiple attorneys until 4:30 p.m. that day, and I had a hearing in another courtroom right after. There's also video surveillance from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office that shows me walking in and out at precisely the times indicated." She kept her voice level. Her expression never wavered. Yet behind that calm facade, a current of indignation and perhaps even sadness simmered. She wasn't simply defending herself. She was laying bare a problem that cut deep. An officer brazen enough to manufacture allegations, and a justice system that might have been ready to accept those allegations at face value had she been an ordinary citizen. Officer Peterson's face grew more strained with each sentence. He stole glances at the judge, hoping to read some flicker of doubt. But Judge Lin was a man who believed in concrete evidence. He scanned the documents and nodded slowly, a scowl forming at the corners of his mouth. "Officer Peterson," the judge said, "the evidence Miss Monroe has provided places her in a completely different location at the time you allege the assault occurred. How do you respond?" Peterson fumbled with his papers, swallowing hard. "Your Honor, there must be some mix-up with the times. The assault happened later in the evening, maybe around dusk. I might have noted the hour incorrectly in my report." But the shift in timing wasn't just a small detail. It moved the entire scenario by a margin that was impossible to explain as a simple clerical error. Judge Lin's eyes narrowed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Would the judge dismiss the case outright, or would he dig deeper? For the first time that day, some spectators sensed that not only would Miss Monroe be cleared, but that the tables might turn on the officer. No sooner had Officer Peterson tried to correct his timeline than Serena stepped forward again. "Your Honor, the official report states the assault happened at exactly 3:15 p.m. I find it peculiar that the officer now claims otherwise. The incident report was submitted promptly, and Officer Peterson wrote it under oath with precise timestamps." Judge Lin tapped his pen on the desk. "Officer, do you have an explanation for the discrepancy?" Officer Peterson's voice cracked slightly. "As I said, there may have been a confusion about the time. It was a hectic day, but not so hectic that you forgot to charge her with assault," Judge Lin interrupted, eyebrows raised. "This is quite serious. The defendant is showing that she was across town, and now we have reason to believe the timeline in your report is false." Peterson's eyes were pinned on Serena Monroe, as if willing her to vanish. Finally, he blurted, "Your Honor, I believe Miss Monroe is manipulating the system. She's well connected. Look at how she's presenting all these logs and documents. Anyone could fake those. She must have known she'd need them someday. She's no regular citizen." A scandalized hush spread through the gallery. The statement was both baseless and revealing of the officer's desperation. But it also echoed a deeper truth. Miss Monroe was not just any defendant. This was a fact that had yet to be fully revealed but was threatening to break loose. Judge Lin's temper flared slightly. "That's enough. Miss Monroe, do you have anything else to add before I make a decision on probable cause?" Serena turned to her table, lifted a sleek black portfolio and faced the court. "Yes, Your Honor. I can also present sworn affidavits from assistant DAs who were with me at the time, as well as clerical staff, security personnel, and city officials. They can verify my presence in a meeting at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Additionally, I have a digital record from the building's sign-in system that logs the exact time I entered and left. I have video evidence to corroborate each data point." She paused for a moment, then stepped away from the defense podium, letting the significance of her words settle over the room. The entire proceeding felt on the verge of tipping. The final push came when Serena smiled gently at Judge Lin. "And if it pleases the court, I can also inform you why these individuals are so certain of my identity. I'm not merely another attorney or staffer in the courthouse. I am the newly appointed chief prosecutor for the state of Georgia. My name is Serena Alicia Monroe, sworn in just 2 months ago by Governor Brian Kemp at the Georgia State Capitol. I'd hoped to address this matter more discreetly, but given Officer Peterson's ongoing misrepresentations, I see no other choice but to clarify exactly who I am." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then it was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. The press of bodies in the gallery shifted in surprise, those who were standing craning their necks to get a clearer look. The judge's expression hardened, recognition dawning on him. Even though he was typically formal, he couldn't hide his shock. Officer Peterson stood frozen, his face drained of color. He realized with horrifying clarity just how badly he had miscalculated. The hush ended in a burst of murmurs and stifled exclamations from every corner of the courtroom. Judge Lin recovered first. Clearing his throat, he addressed the stunned audience. "Order in the court!" He tapped his gavel lightly, eyes still locked on Miss Monroe. "I do recall reading about that appointment. Congratulations, Miss Monroe. Now let's settle this matter." The revelation of Serena Monroe's identity unleashed an aftershock that rocked the legal community. The local news, always hungry for sensational stories, dispatched reporters to the courthouse to gather details. Everyone sensed a big headline: "Police officer falsely accuses state's chief prosecutor." Meanwhile, in the back corridors of the courthouse, members of the district attorney's office exchanged anxious glances. Officer Peterson, for his part, looked like a man grasping at straws in a maelstrom of his own making. If he had knowingly filed false charges against the state's top prosecutor, that spelled disaster, not just for him, but for anyone complicit in the attempt. A close friend of Serena's, Deputy District Attorney Rachel Linden, slipped into the gallery shortly after the revelation. She'd received a text message from a colleague that read, "You won't believe what's going down in 7B." She recognized Serena instantly and clenched her teeth at the sight of Officer Peterson, a man rumored to engage in questionable police conduct. She found an empty seat near the back and sat quietly, eager to see how her friend would proceed. At the defense podium, Serena was calm yet resolute. "Your Honor, based on the clear discrepancies in Officer Peterson's timeline, I ask that the charges against me be dismissed immediately." Judge Lin nodded, flipping through the evidence. "Miss Monroe, I find no probable cause to proceed with the charges. Given the overwhelming evidence of your whereabouts and Officer Peterson's contradictory statements, I am dismissing the case. Additionally, I will be directing the district attorney's office to investigate this matter for potential perjury or other misconduct." The courtroom erupted in voices. Some cheered, others gasped. A wave of relief washed over Serena, though her expression remained measured. She had faced countless intense legal battles, but this was personal, and in many ways it was only the beginning. The damage that might have been inflicted on an everyday citizen weighed heavily on her mind. Officer Peterson lunged forward, sputtering, "Your Honor, This is all a misunderstanding. I swear I didn't." Judge Lin raised his gavel again, silencing the officer. "I suggest you retain counsel, Officer Peterson. This hearing is adjourned." With that, the gavel slammed, and the crowd erupted into a new wave of murmurs and exclamations. Outside, camera crews from local stations ABC and Fox 5 Atlanta jockeyed for position, waiting to get a statement from the newly unmasked chief prosecutor. Serena took a deep breath, knowing the next few minutes would be crucial in shaping public perception. She stepped through the throng of journalists, offering only a measured smile and a simple statement of gratitude for the judge's swift dismissal of the false charges. Officer Peterson darted out a side entrance, flanked by a pair of younger officers who seemed equally unsettled. For now, his flight might buy him a moment of privacy, but the repercussions would follow him. He had set in motion a chain of events that promised to unearth more of his hidden misdeeds. and he was right to be scared. By late afternoon, the corridors had mostly cleared, leaving only the echoes of a day that had turned the legal world upside down. Serena Monroe walked through the nearly empty hallway, her thoughts racing. She found a quiet bench near a massive portrait of past judges and sat down to process the day's events. Within minutes, Rachel Linden approached, her heels clicking against the polished marble. She gave Serena a tight hug. "What on earth was that? Are you okay?" Serena let out a long breath, dropping the guard she had held all day. "I'm shaken, Rachel, but I'm all right. I honestly never expected someone to stoop to outright fabricating charges. It's not the first time an overzealous officer has tried to pin something on me, but I never thought I'd be physically hauled into court like a common criminal." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "You're not just a prosecutor. You're the state's chief prosecutor. This is insane. Do you have any idea why he did it?" Serena gave a grim nod. "I have a theory. My appointment includes a mandate to crack down on police corruption. We're planning a series of investigations into questionable stops and excessive force complaints. I suspect Peterson caught wind of that. Maybe he wanted to silence me, or at least discredit me before I could dig deeper." Rachel's face darkened. "That man has a reputation on the street. People have complained about him for years, but no one could gather enough evidence. He's cunning, and the system often protects people like him." Serena sighed. "Well, not anymore. I'm done playing nice. Today I was the target, but how many others have been railroaded by him? People without my resources or position?" The question hung in the air, reflecting a grim reality. If Officer Peterson was comfortable enough to fabricate a case against the chief prosecutor, then ordinary citizens had likely suffered far worse injustices at his hands. Serena felt a swell of resolve. She would not let this pass. As evening approached, Serena called her staff together at the Georgia Department of Law building. She briefed them on the incident. The room buzzed with outrage and indignation. Many staffers felt protective of Serena, who had earned their respect through fair leadership and deep commitment to justice. "We need to compile everything we can on Peterson," Serena said, setting a solemn tone. "Every complaint, every questionable stop, every piece of evidence we can find. We'll build a thorough case and, if warranted, file charges. This has to be airtight. We can't allow him or anyone like him to continue abusing their power." The staff got to work, diving into archives, scanning footage, and cross-referencing incidents. Within hours, a digital mountain of suspicious patterns began to emerge. Old unresolved complaints. Worn-down plaintiffs who had dropped lawsuits after facing intimidation. Officers who had transferred out of Peterson's precinct under cryptic circumstances. The threads were weaving a tapestry of corruption, and at its center stood Officer Bradley Peterson. Meanwhile, the news cycle had lit up with a sensational story. Media outlets blasted headlines like, "Atlanta officer accuses top prosecutor of assault. Case dismissed amid shocking revelations." Experts weighed in on the potential backlash. Community activists took to social media, voicing rage over how close an innocent woman, albeit a powerful one, came to being railroaded. Others pointed out that if the chief prosecutor could be targeted, ordinary citizens were in even greater jeopardy. Serena stayed late at her office that night, eyes scanning documents, mind racing. A swirl of emotions pulled at her. Anger, relief, a new wave of determination. She thought of her younger days, of the quiet yet fierce resolve that propelled her through law school at John Marshall Law School in Atlanta. She remembered how she had been told many times, both explicitly and implicitly, that a black woman from her background could never rise to the top of the legal pyramid. Yet here she was, forging ahead, and she would not let a corrupt officer dismantle her life's work. The next morning, Serena's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from journalists and supporters. She politely declined interviews, focusing on her investigative work. However, one call caught her attention. It was from an attorney named Paul Reynolds, a high-profile civil rights lawyer known for representing victims of police misconduct. She answered wearily. "Hello, Paul." "Serena, I'm calling because I heard about what happened. First, are you all right?" That must have been horrifying. I'm okay, just disappointed. This could have ruined my career if the judge had believed that officer even briefly. And even if I came out innocent, the stain of an arrest or assault claim would always linger. You know how these things go. Paul's voice was grim. Yes, I do. That's why I'm calling. I represent two families who claim their sons were wrongfully arrested by Peterson. Their lawsuits were quietly settled out of court after months of intimidation. I believe the city used hush money to cover for him. You might want to talk to them if you're building a case. Serena sat up straight. I do want to talk to them, immediately, if you can arrange it. Paul agreed, promising to connect her with the families that very week. As she hung up, a flicker of hope mingled with steely resolve in her heart. This was bigger than her own ordeal. This was a chance to right years of injustice for those whose voices had been systematically drowned out. Soon after, Serena received an unexpected visitor in her office. Captain Janice Moretti of the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Moretti was a tall, imposing woman with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her arrival was unannounced, but Serena welcomed her in. I want to apologize personally, Miss Monroe, Moretti said. Our department is aware of the fiasco in court. It's not something we condone. I assure you, an internal investigation has already commenced regarding Officer Peterson. Serena nodded, studying the captain's demeanor. I appreciate that, but let's be honest. This isn't an isolated incident. His personnel file is peppered with complaints. Those never got properly addressed. Why now? Moretti exhaled, looking both weary and sincere. Peterson's father was once a high-ranking officer. He had connections, and that protected him. But enough is enough. We're not ignoring this anymore, especially after he tried to frame the state's chief prosecutor. Some lines just shouldn't be crossed. Serena let out a bitter laugh. So it took him targeting someone with power, not the dozens of people he might have already harmed. The captain's gaze flickered with regret. I'm here to change that. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. I just hope we can do what's right and restore some trust. People are outraged, and rightfully so. Serena considered her words. There was a part of her that wanted to lash out, to remind Moretti that turning a blind eye is what brought them all to this point. But the other side of her, the pragmatic side, knew that real progress required partnerships. All right, Captain, let's work together. I'll assign a liaison from my office to coordinate with internal affairs. We'll leave no stone unturned. Moretti nodded, relief clear in her stance. Thank you, Miss Monroe. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened. Serena acknowledged the sentiment with a small nod. Yet she couldn't suppress a flare of anger. Apologies came now that she was in a position of power. She vowed silently that her actions would be for those who had been brushed aside when they needed help the most. While Serena's investigation ramped up, Officer Peterson found himself an outcast within his own precinct. Colleagues who had once turned a blind eye to his tactics were now wary of associating with him. Whispers circulated in the locker room, where some officers said it was time for Peterson to pack his bags and retire before the scandal grew worse. Peterson, however, was a man backed into a corner, and cornered men can be dangerous. Late one evening, he snuck into the precinct's evidence room, rifling through files, hoping to discard or alter any incriminating records. He believed if he could just bury or falsify enough paper trails, he might emerge unscathed. But Captain Moretti had anticipated that move. She'd installed extra security measures after the fiasco in court. A hidden camera in the evidence room captured Peterson's every move. By the time he realized the logs were digitally encrypted and near impossible to tamper with, it was too late. Security personnel, guided by Moretti's intel, were waiting for him outside the door. "Officer Peterson," one of them barked, "step away from the files and place your hands where we can see them." Peterson's face contorted with rage. He had no choice but to comply. They escorted him to an interrogation room where Moretti was waiting, arms folded over her chest. "You're suspended, Peterson. Pending further investigation," she said coldly. He sneered. "I have rights. You can't just—" "Oh yes, we can," she cut in. "I saw the footage. You broke policy by attempting to tamper with evidence. Combine that with the fiasco in court, you're lucky you're not in cuffs." Peterson glowered but kept silent. He had bet on the old system of protection, but that system was crumbling around him. His father had retired years ago, and the new wave of leadership was less inclined to cover for him. Now, faced with the reality of losing his badge and pension, Peterson's desperation soared to a new high. As Captain Moretti left the room, Peterson sat alone, contemplating his next move. He knew this was bigger than a single false assault claim now. The chief prosecutor's office, alongside internal affairs, was peeling back the layers of every one of his questionable stops. It was only a matter of time before the full weight of the law came crashing down on him. While Peterson stewed in his predicament, Serena and her team made swift progress. Families represented by Paul Reynolds came forward with testimony about how their loved ones were targeted, harassed, and in some cases injured by Peterson. Records showed suspicious patterns: stops in neighborhoods with predominantly black or immigrant residents, inflated charges later dropped due to lack of evidence, and citations that never made it into official records. A young man named Jamar Rogers, who had been beaten by Peterson during a routine stop and frisk, recounted his story through tears. "He told me I looked like a suspect in a robbery. I was coming back from my shift at the Waffle House, still in my uniform. My manager tried to speak up for me, but Peterson threatened to arrest her too. I spent a night in jail. They dropped the charges the next day, but I'd lost my job. I was too scared to file a complaint." Serena listened patiently, rage simmering within her. It was an all-too-familiar story. A young black man victimized by an officer who faced no real consequences. As Jamar spoke, she imagined how easily it could have been her, if not for the uniform of prestige and power she now wore. For everyone's sake, she had to bring Peterson to justice. Story after story poured in, painting a damning portrait of an officer who had long believed himself untouchable. In each account, a pattern of intimidation or bribery emerged. Payoffs in exchange for silence, threats of rearrest if anyone talked, and even hush money from city funds, sanctioned by unscrupulous higher-ups. Some local politicians had turned a blind eye. The system was a labyrinth of complicity, but Serena was determined to navigate it. Late into the night, she and her closest team members gathered in her office with boxes of files strewn about. Coffee cups and takeout containers littered the conference table. Deputy DA Rachel Linden flipped through an overflowing binder, shaking her head. "This is so much worse than I expected," Rachel said. "He's been at this for years. We even have a few homicide cases that might be connected, though that's going to take more digging." Serena massaged her temples. "I want to build the strongest case possible. No loopholes, no technicalities. We're charging him with whatever is supported by the evidence. Perjury, falsification of records, civil rights violations, assault, everything. And if we find connections to city officials who helped him cover up, we'll go after them too." A ripple of determination washed over the team. They had a formidable foe in Peterson, who clearly had no scruples about resorting to dirty tactics. But they also had the law, and an avalanche of evidence on their side now. With alarming speed, the district attorney's office, in tandem with the state prosecutor's office under Serena's leadership, compiled enough evidence to present the case to a grand jury. The indictment hearing took place in the same courthouse where Peterson had tried to frame Serena. This time the roles were reversed. Instead of Officer Peterson sitting at the prosecution's table, he was led through the back entrance, escorted by deputies. The gravity of the situation was evident by the strict security measures: metal detectors at every door, armed guards in the hallways, and reporters corralled behind designated barriers. Crowds gathered outside with signs calling for justice and accountability. Many wore T-shirts bearing phrases like, "We stand with Serena" or "Justice for Jamar." Inside, the grand jury listened intently as Serena Monroe and her team laid out the evidence. Internal reports, sworn testimony from victims, evidence of tampering with official records, and even the newly uncovered video of Peterson trying to meddle with the evidence room files. They presented each piece meticulously, building an airtight narrative of abuse of power. Officer Peterson's defense attorney tried to label the entire case a witch hunt, pointing to the personal animosity between his client and Miss Monroe. However, the mountain of evidence was too large to ignore. It wasn't just Serena's word against Peterson's. It was dozens of consistent accounts from civilians, other officers, and the precinct's own records. By the time the grand jury concluded, it was no surprise to most observers when they handed down multiple indictments against Peterson. His attorney, red-faced, hurriedly ushered him out of the courtroom amidst a barrage of camera flashes. The footage of him being led to a police cruiser in handcuffs spread across television and social media like wildfire. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Serena allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Indictments were only the beginning. A lengthy trial lay ahead, and Peterson was sure to employ every trick in the book to avoid a guilty verdict. Still, the wheels of justice were finally in motion, propelled by truth rather than subterfuge. True to form, Peterson lashed out in the press, granting an exclusive interview to a sensationalist local news outlet. He insisted he was being framed by radical anti-police elements, and that the charges against him were politically motivated. He attacked Serena Monroe personally, calling her an activist in prosecutor's clothing, who wanted to take down good cops. His words inflamed tensions, and a small but vocal group of supporters rallied around him, claiming he was a victim of political correctness gone mad. For Serena, the smear campaign was predictable but still unsettling. She received threatening emails and phone calls, some of which were laced with racist undertones. The messages varied from thinly veiled warnings to outright violent threats. Security around her office was bolstered, and staffers were cautious. More than once, Rachel Linden reminded her, "Watch your back. Peterson's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." Despite the tension, Serena refused to cower. She continued her public engagements, attending a forum at the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Building on criminal justice reform. The hall was packed, and the conversation grew emotional. Community leaders thanked her for exposing Peterson's corruption. Families of Peterson's alleged victims tearfully recounted their ordeals. Serena responded with compassion and conviction, vowing that her office would push for a thorough, fair trial, and that no stone would be left unturned. In the background, the Internal Affairs Division widened its net, uncovering more officers who had turned a blind eye to Peterson's actions, or worse, aided him. Several high-ranking officials within the police department found themselves under scrutiny for complicity. Some began flipping, providing incriminating evidence against Peterson in exchange for reduced consequences. The noose was tightening, and the city braced for a groundbreaking legal battle that would test the integrity of its justice system. The day Officer Peterson's trial commenced was a spectacle. Journalists from across the country flocked to Atlanta, branding it the trial of the decade due to the scandal's explosive nature. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters, civil rights activists, and a smaller contingent of Peterson loyalists. Inside, Judge Lynn presided once more, flanked by rows of attorneys and staff. Serena, as the state's chief prosecutor, took a seat at the prosecution table alongside her lead trial attorney. She wouldn't be questioning witnesses directly. Her position demanded a broader oversight. But her presence signified the importance of this case. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. Multiple witnesses testified about false arrests, intimidation tactics, and how Peterson abused his authority. Body cam footage from other officers, footage Peterson couldn't tamper with, showed glimpses of him acting aggressively, using slurs or threatening suspects. Expert witnesses broke down data analyses, illustrating how Peterson disproportionately targeted minorities. The final blow came from the evidence of tampering. The prosecution displayed surveillance recordings from the precinct's evidence room, catching Peterson red-handed. Meanwhile, the defense tried to pick apart each witness's credibility, hinting that these were criminals or opportunists looking to make money off lawsuits. But the defense's attacks felt desperate. Their approach lacked consistency, and the emotional testimonies of victims rang powerfully in the courtroom. Some of them broke down on the stand, recalling how they lived in fear for years. The jury, composed of a diverse cross-section of Atlantans, appeared deeply affected. One particularly harrowing testimony came from a young single mother, Maria Delgado, whose husband had been wrongfully arrested and detained for nearly a week on fabricated drug charges. Her tearful account of how their family was torn apart drew open sympathy from the jury box. Peterson avoided her gaze, his expression a rigid mask. Throughout the proceedings, Serena maintained her composure, though her hands occasionally curled into fists beneath the table. She recalled her own harrowing day in court, the fear and anger she had felt when Peterson tried to frame her. Now, seeing the breadth of suffering he had caused, she felt an even deeper resolve to see justice served. After weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and emotional appeals, the case finally drew to a close. The jury deliberated for 2 days, the city holding its collective breath. When they emerged, the tension in the packed courtroom was palpable. On the charge of falsification of law enforcement records, the foreperson read aloud, "We, the jury, find the defendant Bradley Peterson guilty." A wave of gasps and murmured exclamations rolled through the courtroom. Peterson's eyes flicked around wildly, as though searching for an escape route. His attorney stiffened beside him. "On the charge of perjury," the foreperson continued, "we find the defendant guilty." The flurry of camera shutters rattled like a drum roll. Some in the gallery gripped the armrests of their seats, while others clasped hands in silent prayer. "And on the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty." One after another, the guilty verdicts fell like hammer blows. Officer Peterson was found guilty on multiple counts, including assault and various counts of misconduct. The only charge the jury couldn't unanimously agree on was a broader conspiracy claim involving higher-up officials, but that matter would be pursued separately in civil court. When the final verdict was read, a stunned silence descended. Judge Lynn thanked the jury for their service and scheduled a separate sentencing date. He then directed officers to take Peterson into custody immediately. As they approached him, Peterson exploded in a final burst of rage, shouting, "This isn't over. You think you've won? You're all gonna regret this." Security quickly subdued him and escorted him out in handcuffs, as cameras recorded every second. The crowd outside roared with the news, many cheering at the top of their lungs. A smaller cluster of Peterson supporters stood in shock, their placards drooping. The once imposing figure of Officer Peterson receded into the anonymity of prisoner transport, overshadowed by the collective triumph of those he had wronged. In the weeks that followed, the legal shockwaves continued. Several junior officers, now emboldened, came forward to detail other forms of corruption within Peterson's unit. A broader cleanup effort commenced at the department, with Captain Moretti overseeing the overhaul of policies and procedures. The Atlanta Police Department publicly committed to a new era of accountability, though skeptics watched closely, wary of unfulfilled promises. Peterson's sentencing hearing drew another flood of media attention. Judge Lynn, referencing the harm inflicted on both individuals and public trust, delivered a stern punishment, a lengthy prison term, restitution to victims, and the revocation of Peterson's law enforcement certification. The officer who once strutted through the precinct with unshakable confidence now stood in shackles, eyes hollow and face etched with bitterness. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was jubilant for many. Families of Peterson's victims embraced one another, tears streaming down their cheeks. Activists held signs calling this a victory for justice. Serena Monroe, standing amidst the crowd, felt a swell of relief, tempered by the understanding that the fight against abuse of power wasn't confined to one corrupt officer. The system required continual vigilance. In a small press conference, Serena took the podium. Cameras snapped and microphones jostled for position. Her words were clear and resonant. What happened here is more than one trial. It's a statement that no one is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection. Officer Peterson believed his badge was a shield against accountability, but today, justice prevailed. We must stay vigilant. There are still flaws in our system that allow such abuses. My office and I personally will continue to push for reforms, ensuring that what happened to me and to countless others never happens again. The crowd erupted in applause. Flashbulbs flickered, capturing the resolve on her face. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself a moment of unguarded satisfaction. The city had taken a stand, pushing back against the darkness at least for a while. In the days after Peterson's sentencing, Serena was inundated with letters and emails from grateful citizens. Many hailed her as a champion. Some communities requested her presence at town halls to discuss broader policing reforms. She traveled to neighborhoods once terrorized by Peterson, shaking hands with elders who thanked her for restoring some sense of faith in the justice system. At her office, staff members who had worked tirelessly on the case basked in the victory. Together, they compiled additional evidence to pursue charges against higher-ups who had enabled Peterson's misconduct. A few local officials resigned before they could face formal charges, their sudden departures hinting at deeper layers of culpability. Serena's vow to leave no stone unturned continued unabated. Rachel Linden, who had been by Serena's side from the beginning, suggested a well-deserved break. "You need a vacation," she teased, handing Serena a brochure for a beach resort. "This is someplace off the Florida coast where you can just lie on the sand and not think about depositions for a change." Serena laughed. "Don't tempt me, but maybe you're right. A little downtime wouldn't hurt, especially before we launch into the next wave of reforms." They shared a warm moment of camaraderie, reflecting on how the case had transformed them both. They had entered the legal profession to uphold justice, and while the journey was often fraught with heartbreak and setbacks, the taste of victory, genuine, meaningful victory, was sweet indeed. Meanwhile, the city moved forward. The cleanup within the police department garnered cautious praise. Community outreach programs flourished, bridging gaps long left unattended. Serena Monroe's name became synonymous with integrity and resilience. On one of her final evenings before taking a short personal break, Serena walked alone through the quiet corridors of the Fulton County Courthouse. The hush now felt peaceful, rather than foreboding. She paused near the bench where she had first sat down to collect herself, remembering that surreal day when Officer Peterson almost succeeded in framing her. In that moment, she allowed herself a smile. Justice had not only cleared her name but also sparked a movement to hold the powerful accountable. Whatever battles lay ahead, she felt ready, knowing that perseverance, truth, and the collective will to do better would guide her path. She left the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in months, the echo of her footsteps fading into the distance. A new chapter was beginning, for her, for Atlanta, and for the countless people who looked to the legal system with renewed hope. This electrifying showdown in the Fulton County Courthouse proves that truth still holds immense power, even when confronted by deception at the highest levels. The triumphant fight for justice led by Serena Monroe signals the beginning of a broader reckoning, a renewed commitment to ensuring every badge stands for integrity, not intimidation. By exposing Officer Peterson's misconduct, a message resounds far beyond Atlanta. No one is too mighty to be held accountable, and no community is too voiceless to seek redress. That spark of hope will continue to guide us as we work toward building a system where fairness is the norm and corruption finds no refuge. If you've been moved by this story of resilience and moral courage, please like this video, share it to keep the conversation going, and subscribe for more stories that champion truth and justice. Your voice matters. Let's amplify it together.